It's not the war in Iraq that's revolutionizing the Middle East. It's the media. Mark Lynch, author and expert on media and the Middle East.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. We are talking about media perspective, how journalists and media organizations bring different perspective during the coverage of Iraq, with Nadia Abul-Majd, Akiva Aldar, and Robert Dreyfus. Robert Dreyfus, what lies behind the ostensible recent decline in the American interest of the Iraq story? Did the Americans walk away from the story, or the press walked away from Iraq?
Well, I think largely the press is following the public interest here, and Americans, I'm sad to say, have stopped caring about Iraq because the level of violence is down. In particular, the number of Americans killed every month has declined sharply. So Americans have stopped thinking about Iraq. It's almost as if they don't care over here how many Iraqis have killed, the fact that hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have died, that the state has been reduced to rubble, that the economy and the institutions were dismantled and destroyed. The fact that Americans aren't dying has caused the public to shift its attention away from the war. The fact that the Iraqi government is now in the hands largely of people who are agents of Iran, or at least allies of Iran next door, the precise paradoxical opposite of what President Bush tried to accomplish allegedly in going into Iraq, doesn't register here at all. And so Americans have focused on the decline in violence. And of course, I think we know now that masks the fact that Iraq is still poised to explode, not just over Kirkuk, which could blow up at any time, but also over the coming assault against the Sons of Iraq, the Awakening or Sahwa movement, which again is poised to explode. Yes. There's a lot of problems in Iraq, and Americans aren't paying attention at all. It's just faded away from the front pages. And I think most Americans have turned the page. Nadia, they initially were big supporters of the war, and now they've decided that it wasn't worth fighting.
Nadia, Robert has been brutally frank in his assessment about how the American media is looking at Iraq. As an Egyptian journalist, when you look at that, do you look also on the positive side of Iraq? Now that Iraq, everybody tells us, is democracy, parties are abound, newspapers are thriving, and Iraqis can express themselves. Do you look at that with skepticism, or do you give the Iraqi government, as well as the American enterprise in Iraq, the benefit of the doubt that there is a negative side to it, but at the same time, there is a positive aspect to it?
I think it's very difficult to talk about positive when you talk about Iraq or see what's happening still in Iraq. Very, very difficult indeed. The fact that Saddam Hussein disappeared from the picture doesn't mean that what is existing now is democracy. And even if it was democracy, which isn't, I mean, how can you justify all of this violence and the ethnic cleansing and the killing and the whole state? It's not a state anymore. So it's very difficult to talk about positive when you have such a very negative picture at all aspects.
Before I go to Akiva, Robert, argue for me the point why Iraq, in your opinion, is not a democracy, as we are told day in and day out by the Bush administration.
Well, you know, the political parties in Iraq are basically mafias. They're not really political parties. Almost none of them have any deep roots in the country. The main political party, the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, is a militia-based party that doesn't have real popular support. The Al-Dawa party is a party of intellectuals that has no real base in the population. The Sunnis, the Iraqi Islamic Party, was elected with 2% of the Sunnis voting in that last election and represents almost no one, so they're going to be swept away in the provincial elections coming up. The people in local provinces are mostly reliant on local militias and armed groups to protect them. The same is true in the north, where the Kurds are anything but a democracy. The two Kurdish parties, again, are like two mafias that run that part of the country. So it's a complete and utter mess.
Point well taken,
really
Robert.
Built around violence.
Akiva, When I invited you to this show, and you told me that the Israelis are not interested in Iraq anymore, absolutely whatsoever. Is it because that Iraq is no longer a threat to Israel? We remember back in 1991 when Saddam lobbed several missiles onto Israel. Is it because the threat from the east has gone, or is it because of domestic Israeli policy they are not interested in this American quagmire in Iraq?
I think both. Actually, the Israelis are looking further southeast to Iran right now. And as you know, President Ahmadinejad was addressing the UN and made some very naughty remarks towards Israel. And the Israelis, of course, are very concerned about the nuclear program. And they also look at this threat of the Shiite crescent going all the way, as you mentioned before, from Iran through Iraq to Syria and Lebanon with Hezbollah and Hamas. And this is the way the Israelis are seeing Iraq. They see Iraq as part of the Iranian Shiite threat, since I think the Israeli media doesn't believe that the Americans will be able to get out with Iraq, leaving behind them a democratic state. So we are concerned about the risk and the possibility that Iraq will be part of this Iranian huge front that Israel will have to face. So it's not Iraq proper, it's Iraq as part of a very troubling puzzle, if you like, in the Middle East.
Before I finish this program with Robert Dreyfus, let me just go to Nadia. Nadia, how the Egyptian newspapers in general, especially the big ones like Al-Ahram and Al-Akhbar and Sha'ab, are covering Iraq right now? Are they giving the benefit of the doubt to the new regime in Iraq, or do they look at it askance with a negative coverage?
No, I don't think there is any, they are not giving any benefit of the doubt to the new government. It's almost like what it has been, that sort of there is many of I told you so, that many Egyptians were actually not, were opposed to this war in Iraq. And for them, every day proved that they were right. I mean, it's reported about all of these explosions and all of these Iraqis dying and stuff, but they are not happy and with the new government or with how things are in Iraq, which is very difficult for anybody to be happy. And the other thing, there is also a lot of sensitivity to Shiites and stuff. So the fact that the government, as Robert said, it's run by allies to Iran and stuff, making Egyptians are nervous about that.
Robert, I am going to close the show with you. I will take you back to the eve of the war. Explain to me, how was it possible that the American media, well-renowned for investigative journalism and asking hard questions, need I remind our viewers that Bernstein and Woodward, they brought the Nixon administration down. This question of WMDs and the mushroom cloud and nuclear capabilities of Iraq, how did it escape the American media, or did they have an axe to grind?
No, what happened was very, very simple. We had just been attacked on September 11th. The country was traumatized. Millions of Americans could only think about revenge. And basically that meant going after anybody who looked like he was anti-American and had a mustache. And as you know, Saddam had a mustache. And so when President Bush, who had the political power of King Kong at that point, said, we're going to go after Iraq, the public overwhelmingly fell in line, and the media, unfortunately, was simply unable to stand up to that avalanche. There were a few brave souls that tried, but especially on television, it was overwhelming. The owners of the television channels put tremendous pressure on reporters not to investigate because it was hurting their ratings, because Americans were so revved up for war that they were turning off channels that presented criticism of the war. So Bush used that momentum to go to war, and it's a shameful blot on American journalistic history that more reporters, except for that lonely few, weren't able to stand up to that.
Independent journalist Robert Dreyfus, Akiva Eldar, senior columnist with Haaretz newspaper, Nadia Abul-Majd, Cairo bureau chief of the UAE newspaper The National. Thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. That's all the time we have for this week. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Until then, goodbye.